You're listening to Digging Star Wars, the online journal of the films that inspired George Lucas to create the Star Wars saga. Welcome to the first ever podcast of Digging Star Wars. I'm your host, Chris Mitch. I hope no matter where you're listening in on our podcast, you visit diggingstarwars.blogspot.com not only to listen in to future episodes, but most importantly, to post your comments and questions. Before we dive into today's topics, allow me to explain what I hope to accomplish here. Digging Star Wars is an interactive film history experience where we will explore the many films that George Lucas has drawn inspiration from for the 6 Star Wars films. To date, I've made a list of more than 100 films Lucas has borrowed from, and this list will surely grow. As a matter of fact, I hope your involvement in this blog enables the list to grow. The maker himself, Mr. Lucas, has flat out called some of these films on my list, like Akira Kurosawa's The Hidden Fortress, a clear and obvious source of material. Other films have been labeled as predecessors in books, reviews, exhibits, interviews, critiques, and whatnot, calling out their connection to our favorite far, far away galaxy. The remainder films are simply from my observations. Not only am I happy to highlight these classic films that nurtured Lucas's creativity, which ultimately gave birth to Star Wars, but would like to discuss the commonality of the films, explored the shared themes, symbols, and messages of these works, and why the films are still relevant and worth watching today. Finally, Digging Star Wars is also a launching pad where we can begin to put into action what we have learned from these cinematic stories. If Star Wars has taught its fans anything, it is to believe in something bigger than ourselves, to fight oppression, and to serve the greater good. One final note, and this certainly ties into my invitation for followers to post per podcast, everything here is fodder for debate. When answering to the many similarities between Akira Kurosawa's The Hidden Fortress and Star Wars, Lucas himself pointed out that there are what he termed direct inspirations and mere coincidences. What could be more enjoyable for Star Wars fans to debate whether or not a film was an actual inspiration to any and all episodes within the saga, or merely possessed these so-called coincidences? Okay, let's find out what this baby can do. It was pretty much a no-brainer that if I was going to look at the films that inspired Star Wars A New Hope, and the sequels and prequels that followed, I would need to start with Akira Kurosawa's The Hidden Fortress. With the possible exception of Michael Anderson's 1955 film, The Dam Busters, no other film is so blatantly an ancestor of Star Wars, in particular the original Star Wars movie released in 1977. Akira Kurosawa is the all-time most familiar Japanese director to Western audiences. He has been given the same level of respect as great filmmakers like David Lean, John Ford, and D.W. Griffith. He worked in all genres and periods and loved to combine the old with the new and the East with the West. His works have won the top prize at the 1951 Venice Film Festival and the Best Foreign Film Oscar in 1975. Many of his films have provided intercultural inspiration and fathered numerous remakes of his work, the most famous being Kurosawa's The Seven Samurai and its Hollywood cowboy copy, The Magnificent Seven. Like many others, Lucas loved his work, and it shows. From Kurosawa's use of the long-lensed ice lake characters within their landscape, to the familiar linear wipes from scene to scene, The Hidden Fortress provided the photographic components that made up the visual experience of Star Wars. The Hidden Fortress gets even more interesting when you examine the story, characters, and plot points. IMDb.com, the Internet Movie Database, provides the following short synopsis of The Hidden Fortress. Quote, lured by gold, 2 greedy peasants escort a man and woman across enemy lines. However, they do not realize that their companions are actually a princess and her general. Unquote. And while that is an adequate 2-sentence synopsis of the film, it does not tell the complete tale of The Hidden Fortress. For that, you'll need to watch the film. And while you're watching, look for Kurosawa scenes that look and feel remarkably familiar to their Star Wars counterparts. Watch for the Kurosawa prototypes of the New Hope scene, where Han Solo chases the stormtroopers on the Death Star, only to turn the corner and face overwhelming numbers of even more stormtroopers. the Return of the Jedi speeder bike chase, as told on horseback, Anakin Skywalker's infamous and mysterious scar above and below his eye, featured in both Revenge of the Sith and in Return of the Jedi, the key plot point of The Phantom Menace, where Queen Amidala has decoy handmaidens that pretend to be the queen by wearing her garb and ceremonial makeup in order to protect the real queen, and finally, a strikingly similarly composed shot to that of Anakin's meditation scene on Naboo in Attack of the Clones. Even the Star Wars term Jedi is undoubtedly derived from the Japanese film term Jedi Geki, which translates as period set pictures, a primary focus in the middle of Kurosawa's career. Now, consider all those examples and note, we haven't even touched upon the primary influence Kurosawa had on George Lucas via The Hidden Fortress. I'm referring to the core characters of the Star Wars story, our favorite droids, C-3PO and R2-D2. In an interview available on the Criterion Collection DVD of The Hidden Fortress, Lucas explained how he took Kurosawa's approach to telling an epic war story from the point of view of the lowest of the low, two poor peasants. Funny, submissive, yet yielding often to their own greed and concern for their own welfare, the Hidden Fortress characters of Tahai and Matashiki, I'm sure I'm butchering the pronunciation of their names, please forgive me. Anyway, they struggle through life in wartime and must join an older general and young feisty princess on the return trip to the princess's homeland. Along the way, Tahai and Matashiki are forced to do menial labor, constantly question their friendship, and wondering why they are made to suffer. In a poignant scene where both Tahai and Matashiki seek forgiveness from each other after their numerous arguments, they come to the conclusion that they were simply destined to suffer. That's just the way it was meant to be. Tahai and Matashiki are not only the source material for the personalities of 3PO and R2, Lucas modeled the droid's physical appearance after the two of them. Tahai is tall, lanky, and always talking down, both physically and figuratively, to Matashiki. Matashiki is short, balding, and occasionally gets to demonstrate that he is more resourceful than Tahai. I remember the first time I saw The Hidden Fortress in high school, I was blown away by how much they were like their mechanical Star Wars counterparts, 3PO and R2. The best example of Tahai and Matashiki serving as inspiration for the droid duo is a scene in The Hidden Fortress where the two characters decide early on in the film to go separate ways, as they bicker in the middle of a barren wasteland on the edge of a horrible battle. And, like R2 and 3PO finding each other in the Jawa sand crawler after their fight in the desert, fate brings Tahai and Matashiki back together quickly, and the story of the Hidden Fortress resumes. Well, why did Lucas, and Kurosawa for that matter, want to show life during wartime from the point of view of the poor and lowly? Well, it's a unique and different point of view than that of the standard epic process of following a god, hero, or other powerful character. Kurosawa pokes fun at the pair of greedy peasants and uses them for comedic relief from the weighted story that shows the ugliness of war, the sacrifices of soldiers in the name of honor, the struggles of women in a feudal society torn asunder, and the class role reversal as a rich princess must act like a mute simpleton amongst commoners who rape and plunder as they please. But do robots represent the poor or an oppressed race of individuals in Star Wars? Even though various robots inhabit many scenes of Star Wars, they're taken for granted and are certainly subservient. Yet we are told that 3PO and R2 in particular are different, special, and trustworthy. Perhaps that is why it is so offsetting when Wurher, the human bartender at the Mos Eisley Cantina, barks at Luke Skywalker, "Hey, we don't serve their kind here. You're droids. They'll have to wait outside." Certainly, adult viewers recognize this vocabulary of segregation. But children viewing this, with little to no recollection of the pre-civil rights era, can clearly interpret that this charged statement by the Mos Eisley mixologist positions 3PO and R2 as members of a lower class, who are not respected by the majority. Just think of all the grief Han Solo gives 3PO throughout the original trilogy. Even the ever-wise Obi-Wan seems to brush off the intrinsic value of the droids themselves in both Star Wars Episode 4 A New Hope and in the prequel Episode 2 Attack of the Clones. In Episode 2, when his good friend and Coruscant diner owner Dexter Jettster teases Obi-Wan for believing analysis droids, Obi-Wan replies, "Well, if droids could think, there'd be none of us here, would there?" This statement is also charged in that Obi-Wan has witnessed R2's ability to save the Jedi and Queen in Episode 1 and other times. Also, Obi-Wan knows firsthand the destruction of battle droids and their ability to run and conduct death camps on Naboo during the Trade Federation occupation. In other words, if you give these lowly sentient beings any power, they could kill us all. But, with a wonderful deliverance of the line from Ewan McGregor, channeling Sir Alec Guinness, it sounds wise, insightful, humorous, and light, much like a conversation in the Hidden Fortress, when the older general shares the news with a governing high council that the lowly peasants Matashiki and Tahai solved the problematic return route to the princess's homeland. An elder replies to the general, "Well, it seems like even Moss can think." This disrespect for the poor, along with the assumption that they are unintelligent or as smart as moss on a stone, is almost a casual aside in Kurosawa's work. But is it in Lucas's work? I'm not 100% positive that it is. After all, Obi-Wan and Yoda, the two wisest characters in the saga, have no money. They never pay for anything. In the Star Wars radio drama, Obi-Wan even emphasizes this point to money-grubbing Han Solo. Quote, "A credit has never passed through my hand, and I am no less happier for it," unquote, the ancient Jedi proclaimed. It's a monastic echo of the Jedi lifestyle, and, if you want to push this metaphor further, Yoda's first on-screen arrival in the trilogy is a comedic, stereotypical representation of a homeless person. He shows up in rags, prattles in unusual diction, and picks through Luke Skywalker's little tin box looking for anything of value. While a lot of Yoda's teachings and mannerisms have been accredited as Buddhist philosophies, I also think Lucas tapped into the teachings of the Catholic saint Francis of Assisi, known for his rejection of personal wealth and vow to poverty. Similar to St. Francis, Yoda abandoned an opulent lifestyle at the Jedi Temple on Coruscant to live the rest of his days in squalor in a humble mud hut on Dagobah. Even the Jedi Code, which older fans who played the West End Games role-playing game in the late 80s and 90s may remember, is a poetic reinterpretation of the prayer of St. Francis. Google and read the Jedi Code, then Google and read the prayer of St. Francis, and you'll see what I mean. That said, I'm asking you to think, post, and discuss this point. What does this tying of droids to the poor mean? What is Lucas and the many talented people who created Star Wars communicating about the poor and their place in society? Keep in mind, this message may have been sent intentionally or unintentionally. And while the less fortunate are on your mind, please take this opportunity to consider how you can help them, especially now as we are on the brink of winter. Please consider donating not only to your favorite charities, as is custom this time of year, but to a local charity that houses, feeds, and clothes the poor. Donate time or money. Donate used clothing. Buy an extra present, maybe even a Star Wars toy, and drop it off at Toys for Tots, a giving tree at a local church, or other toy and gift drives that many businesses operate in the months of November and December. I personally received mailings from soup kitchens and the like that were asking for as little as $2 to provide one homeless person a hot meal this Thanksgiving or Christmas. Remember, after Yoda ripped apart Luke's camp in The Empire Strikes Back, the first thing he did for Luke, before continuing his Jedi training, was to feed him. Food is life, and there's plenty of it to go around. And with that, I'd like to thank you for listening to our first podcast. I'd like to give a special shout out to those listening in Professor Ashley's fall semester critical pedagogies class at Westchester University of Pennsylvania. Thanks to Paula Burke for providing our disclaimer voiceover you're about to hear at the end of this podcast. Thanks as well to George Wolstahome, who designed our lovely logo, and to Dr. Paul Ohlers of American University, who wrote and recorded our theme song. Finally, thanks to you for listening, and hopefully posting comments on our blog. Please look for our next episode on diggingstarwars.blogspot.com, where we compare and contrast the ever-popular Star Wars The Empire Strikes Back with David O. Selznick's production of Margaret Mitchell's Gone with the Wind.
Digging Star Wars is produced by Mitch Media and has no connection to Lucasfilm Limited whatsoever. Copyrights for films, trademark characters, and related materials discussed in Digging Star Wars remain with their respective owners. For a list of references or source material, please send an email to diggingstarwars@gmail.com.